Shalawam, giving all praises to the Heavenly Father, Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Racha, Kodash. Double honors unto the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone who taught me this truth and rule well. Peace, love, and salutations to the hopeful elect scattered across the four corners of the earth. This is your brother Khalak out of the Great Millstone Atlanta camp, coming to you again with another Lord willing edifying video. In this lesson, we're going to be diving into who is the devil / Satan / Lucifer / the Antichrist. Here in these latter days, the Lord has sent his spirit of truth into the earth and is causing these lies and strongholds that have consumed the minds of the masses to be cast down. One aspect of the Bible that has been extremely misunderstood over the years is who exactly the devil, Satan, Lucifer, and the Antichrist are. But Lord willing, this video can provide an accurate understanding. So starting off, we're going to grab the definition of Satan. When we read the word Satan in the Old Testament, it was translated from the Hebrew word shatan. This Hebrew word shatan essentially means an adversary. When you read the word Satan in the New Testament, it was translated from the Greek word Satan. This Greek word Satan comes from the Hebrew word shatan, and it essentially means the adversary or the prince of evil spirits or a Satan-like man. Now, when you read the word devil in the New Testament, it was translated from the Greek word diabolos. This Greek word diabolos essentially means a slanderer or false accuser. Then metaphorically, it could be applied to a man who, by opposing the cause of the Most High, may be said to act the part of the devil or to side with him. So ultimately, when you read the word Satan or devil in the Bible in general, it could be applied to either the spiritual demon Satan or a person who sides with the devil by opposing the Most High. Spiritual discernment in context must be used to determine which one it is talking about when you read the devil or Satan. And we're going to get into a few examples of both here, Lord willing. So starting off here in Job chapter 1 and 6, this is dealing with the spiritual demon Satan. It reads, "Now there was a day when the sons of the Most High came to present themselves before the Lord Yahweh, and Satan came also among them. And the Lord Yahweh said unto him, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord Yahweh and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it." So this is speaking of when the Lord allowed Satan to torment Job as a test. Here in verse 6, it says, "When the sons of the Most High came to present themselves, Satan came also." This lets you know that Satan is also a son of the Most High. He works for the Lord. As we know, this reality is a big movie that's already written out by the Lord. And what we're going to get into here soon is how the Lord controls both sides, good and evil. This is the book of 1 Kings chapter 22 and 19. This is when the Lord allowed an evil spirit to convince King Ahab of Israel to go to war where he would eventually die. It reads, "And he said, Hear thou therefore the word of the Lord Yahweh. I saw the Lord Yahweh sitting on his throne, and all the host of heaven standing by him on his right hand and on his left." So here we're seeing the vision of the Lord in heaven with his hosts, the righteous spirits being on his right hand side and the wicked spirits being on his left hand side. These spirits or angels are who the Lord dispatches into the earth, into the minds of humans to do the things they do. Reading on in verse 20, it says, "And the Lord Yahweh said, Who shall persuade Ahab that he may go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? And one said on this manner, and another said on that manner. And there came forth a spirit and stood before the Lord Yahweh and said, I will persuade him. And the Lord Yahweh said unto him, Wherewith? And he said, I will go forth, and I will be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. And he said, Thou shalt persuade him and prevail also. Go forth and do so." So the Lord allowed this spirit to go put lies into the minds of the prophets to convince King Ahab to go to war where he would eventually die, and this was all to fulfill the Lord's will. This is the book of Isaiah chapter 45 and 7. It says, "I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord Yahweh, do all these things." Again, the Lord is in control of this entire movie. He uses his right hand and left hand spirits to go down into the minds of humans on earth to do the things they do, and this ultimately fulfills prophecy. Many people outside of this truth, especially those in Christianity, don't really understand the balance of the Lord. As it says in Ecclesiasticus, also known as Sirach, chapter 33 and 14, that good is set against evil. And also in Proverbs 11 and 1, a false balance is an abomination to the Lord. This is the book of 1 Chronicles, chapter 21 and 1. And Satan stood up against Israel and provoked David to number Israel. Now, this is speaking of when David decided to number all of Israel, and the Lord eventually punished them because of it. But here it says, Satan stood up against Israel. And knowing how the Lord has his right hand and left hand spirits, it was ultimately the Lord's will that this happened. Now to deal with the physical counterpart of Satan on the earth, this is Luke chapter 10 and 18. And he said unto them, I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven. Now Christians will say that this is when Satan was kicked out of heaven, but that is not what this is talking about. This is actually speaking of Esau Edom, the so-called white man, when he falls from power after Yahushua returns. To prove that, this is Isaiah chapter 14 and 12, speaking of the taunt that Israel would take up after being delivered from Babylon, America. It reads, How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? Skipping down to verse 16, it says, They that see thee shall narrowly look upon thee and consider thee, saying, Is this the man that made the earth to tremble, that did shake kingdoms? So when the Israelites are delivered from Babylon, we are going to take up a proverb against Lucifer. And here in verse 16, it calls him a man. Now this word Lucifer was translated from the Hebrew word hayalal. This Hebrew word hayalal essentially means light bearer. It was never the actual name of Satan. It's referring to the illuminated ones on the earth, the elites of Esau Edom, also known as the Illuminati. In this second definition, it says, describing the king of Babylon, which we know as Esau Edom, the so-called white man, according to Psalms chapter 137, 7 and 8. Now to further prove that this Satan and Lucifer that was cast down was speaking about a man, this is Revelation chapter 12 and 3. It says, And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his heads. This red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns is speaking of the Roman Empire, which has been revived and today is known as NATO in the EU. Reading on in verse 4, it says, And his tail drew the 3rd part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth, and the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. And we know this dragon is speaking of the Roman Empire because verse 4 is referring to when King Herod tried to kill Yahushua as soon as he was born. That can be found in Matthew chapter 2 and 13. As we know, Herod was an Edomite, and he was set up as king of the Jews by the Romans. Skipping down to verse 7, this is speaking of the war in heaven when Yahushua returns. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels. This is speaking of when Esau Edom attempts to fight against Yahushua when he returns. The dragon's angels is speaking of Esau Edom's weapons and technology. Verse 8 says, And prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. This goes back to Luke 10 when it said Satan fell from heaven, and Isaiah 14 where Lucifer was fallen. Continuing on in verse 9, it says, And the dragon was cast out, that old serpent, called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Again, speaking of Esau Edom losing terribly when Yahushua returns. Also note that the dragon was also called that old serpent and the devil and Satan. This is the book of Revelation chapter 19 and 14, speaking of the return of Yahushua and further proving that Satan in Revelation 12 was speaking of men. It says, And the armies which were in heaven followed him upon white horses, clothed in fine linen, white and clean. And out of his mouth goeth a sharp sword, that with it he should smite the nations, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron. And he treadeth the winepress of the fierceness and wrath of almighty power. So notice here it said that Yahushua would smite the nations when he returns. Skipping down to verse 18, it says, that ye may eat the flesh of kings, and the flesh of captains, and the flesh of mighty men, and the flesh of horses, and of them that sit on them, and the flesh of all men, both free and bond, both small and great. Again, the devil in Revelation 12 is speaking of men. This is the book of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and 3. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. And this is speaking of Esau Edom, the so-called white man, as he is being revealed in these last days for his true identity, the wicked. Skipping down to verse 8, it says, and then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. Here, when it says that wicked, it's speaking of a specific people. As we know in Malachi chapter 1 and 4, Esau Edom is called the border of wickedness. Continuing on in verse 9, it says, even him whose coming is after the working of Satan, with all power and signs and lying wonders. So this makes it crystal clear that Satan does have a physical counterpart on the earth. This is the book of Revelation chapter 2 and 10. Fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison, that ye may be tried, and ye shall have tribulation 10 days. Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life. Here, the devil is speaking of Esau Edom, as it says he will cast some of you into prison. Now finally, to deal with the Antichrist, this is 1 John chapter 2 and 18. It says, little children, it is the last time, and as ye have heard that Antichrist shall come, even now are there many Antichrists, whereby we know that it is the last time. So contrary to the teachings of the Christian church, there are many Antichrists, not just one specific man. And this word Christ means Mashiach, meaning anointed. In the definition for anti-Hamashiach, it just means the adversary of the Messiah. So this could be applied to many people. But Lord willing, this video was edifying and straight to the point. I'm going to end it by giving all praises to the Heavenly Father, Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Racha, Kwadash. Once again, double honors unto the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone. Peace, love, and salutations to the hopeful elect. Shalawam.